So I did see Dark Side of the Ring's episode on Gentleman Chris Adams last week, as well as I saw last night's on Sensational Sherri Martel. And I'm going to start with Chris Adams here. And I have to say that if you are used to Dark Side of the Ring getting dark, then I'm going to tell you right now that the Chris Colt one, the Chris Adams one last week, and even to an extent the Sherri Martel one, pretty much will, I guess you could say, give you what you want. Because, with the Chris Adams one, I'm going to say this. It pretty much went over, a lot of what we already knew if you knew about the background and the history, personally and professionally of Chris Adams. It went over that. It talked about his time in world-class championship wrestling, how he came over to the United States from the UK. They even had footage of him competing in the UK before coming over. And they even talk about the fact that his brother was a judo champion, Olympic judo champion. They even interviewed his brother. They interviewed his daughter and his son, who still think very highly of him, basically, being his children. Of course, they're not going to want to say anything bad about the father, I should say. They talked to Kevin Von Erich, Danny Manning, who worked with him in World Class. As well as a few others. Iceman Parsons they talked to as well. And they even talked to the guy that he lived with after his wrestling career pretty much came to an end, Boo Ray, as they call him. That's his nickname. His real name is Brent, I believe. And yeah, it was a very, like I say, dark episode of Dark Side of the Ring, no doubt, because they went over a lot of the things that we had already heard about, mostly when it came to Adams, alcohol addiction, his drug addiction and everything, and how basically when he would get a lot of alcohol inside of him or some drugs inside of him, he would basically change. Like it was a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of situation. Like without the drugs and the alcohol, he was Dr. Jekyll. But when he had it, he became Mr. Hyde. And there were various instances to where, pretty much, he would, go into such a rage that, according to those that encountered him and saw it for themselves, his eyes would glow. I don't know how that's possible, but that's basically how they described it, and the dramatization put it, that his eyes would glow. And they went over a lot of instances as well. They went over the original plane ride from hell. They went over that. Where basically he got into it with a stewardess who basically what happened on this flight, is they were delayed for a little bit from what I understood. So they decided to open up the bar for the passengers, the wrestlers and all that. But when it got time for them to take off, they cut off the bar. And Adams wasn't happy about that, and he basically went into a rage. He insulted the female attendant. This got the attention of the co-pilot, who he basically headbutted in the head, if you will. He headbutted him in the head. And that caused him to get arrested as soon as they landed, and he ended up serving what was originally supposed to be like a 6-month sentence. He only served for about 3 months, 90 days. And that was it. But yeah, they went over a lot of the things we heard about in several documentaries before, like the WWE's documentary on World Class, the Tales and the Territories, and everything. They talked about that. They did go over some things like, Adams kind of being in a rage or something like that when he and his family were driving, and he reached over and I guess was hitting his wife, and his son had to get him to stop and stuff like that. So so pretty much they went, like I said, they went over stuff we knew about already and some stuff we didn't know about, as well. They did talk to Jeannie, a.k.a. Lady Blossom in WCW. They talked to her. And yeah, they just went over everything, his career in and out of the ring, how he was convinced or talked into, opening up a wrestling school, and, that one of his first students was Steve Austin, Stone Cold Steve Austin. So, they went over pretty much every nook and cranny that they could in the time they were allotted to by Vice. They went over every nook and cranny, if you will, of Adams' career. They did all that. And, like I said, they talked to Boo Ray, the guy he lived with, and who was the one that shot him. Because what happened is that when he was living with Boo Ray had made it pretty much clear that he did not want any substance, any kind of alcoholic drug substance in his house. He didn't want that. And Adams, of course, obviously didn't respect his wishes, because what happened is Adams met another girl called Linda, I believe. I think that's what her name was. And basically met her. They were going out for a while, for about a few weeks, maybe a month. And he brought her home one night when he was living with Boo Ray. And what happened is that, Boo Ray saw what they were going to do. They were going to drink as well as have some GHB. And he had basically let Adams know, hey, don't bring this stuff into my house. But of course, he did it anyway, and he mixed the GHB, this being Adams, with the alcohol and stuff, from what the dramatization pointed out, and we can assume pretty much was, something that actually happened. But anyway, what happened is that Boo Ray, he decided, okay, I'm going to let you guys do what you're going to do. I'm going to go head to bed. So what happens is he leaves them be, and then he wakes up around 5 a.m., in the morning, 5 a.m. in the morning, and he goes to his living room, and he sees them both, passed out. He sees Adams passed out on a chair, and he sees Linda lying on the ground, and her lungs are basically, kind of not breathing regularly, if you will. So Boo Ray decides, instead of calling 911, he calls his best friend, and his best friend's the one that, his best friend's the one that tells him, you might want to call 911. You might want to do that if they're not breathing. So he calls 911 after the friend tells him to do it. They come in, the paramedics come in. They're able to revive and save Adams, but they can't revive and save Linda. She pretty much passes on because of this. And Adams, I think, is, charged with manslaughter or involuntary manslaughter or something like that. And basically, he's awaiting trial. And I guess this takes a while, 3 months, a year, whatever. And he's still living with Boo Ray. And what happens basically is Boo Ray and him are having, some drinks and everything. But of course with Chris Adams, he gets a little crazy, right? So Boo Ray says something, according to what he said. He says something, that Adams takes the wrong way, and Adams starts attacking him. He starts punching him, biting him on the face, choking him. And Boo Ray reaches for his .35 caliber, or whatever it is, his gun that he has on the shelf, and his intention was to shoot Adams in the shoulder to get him off him, right? But because Adams was, acting erratic, the moment that Boo Ray shot him, instead of hitting him in the shoulder, Adams, acting the way he does, caused his body to move right square center of the bullet, and the bullet got him right in the heart. Pretty much killing him instantly. Now, Boo Ray, surprisingly, was let off out of self-defense. But here's what's interesting. Chris Adams' brother does not believe it was out of self-defense. That it was something else. Like, even Jeannie, believes as well that there was something more going on. Like with alcohol involved with the two of them, like, yeah, there's something that we're not being told. Like the truth is there, but we're not getting it. You know, the actual truth is there, we're not getting it. But anyway, basically, you know, they show the photos, they show some of the crime photos, even the one with Adams dead on the bed. You don't see his full body, you just see like the bottom half of it. And they talk about how there was a lot of wrestlers and family that showed up for his funeral and stuff. And basically it was a very, like I said, a very dark episode. But again, the kids want people to remember him as the individual that without the alcohol was everything, you know, he was presented as. He was a gentleman. He was a nice guy and stuff. Now, of course, like I said, with the career, they went over his time in World Class Championship Wrestling. They went over his time in Global Wrestling Federation, GWF. They went over his brief time in WCW. You know, they went over all of that. But again, the main focus was the dark parts of it. And yeah, if you want Dark Side of the Ring to live up to what it says it is, this did it. This is one of those episodes like the Chris Colt one that did it. But it wasn't the only one. The other one they talked about last night, the new one, was on Sensational Sherri Martel. Now this one I was looking forward to because I grew up on Sensational Sherri. I remember watching her in WWF, and I saw her come into WCW as Sensuous Sherri. You know, I remember all of this. And there were some things I already knew about, you know, from her career, you know, from her career-wise, if you will. And there were some things I didn't. Like, for example, I did not know that Jim Cornette was her first manager. And that they were both put together, you know, around 81 to 82, and they were both still very green in the business. But yeah, Jim Cornette had known Sherri for over 40 years. Well, had known Sherri for about 40-something years, 30-plus years, when she passed. But they knew each other, you know, for a long time because he was her manager. He was her manager and everything. And he even has an autographed photo from her that he got at a WrestleCon, if you will. That she put, you know, she wrote on there, remember, I was always your first. Because essentially she was one of the first, you know, individuals he managed. Anyway, they went over it, and, they went over her career in and out of the ring. And I did not know this, but she was also kind of in an on and off relationship in the mid to late 70s with Jake the Snake Roberts. And that was amazing to even find out. I was like, well, I was watching this, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. She was in a relationship with Jake the Snake? Oh, that's cool. That's kind of cool. But also, by extension, you know, this got her to get to know, because she was working with her as well, Jake's sister, Rockin' Robin, who they also interviewed. So I was kind of glad to see that. And Rockin' Robin, for her age, is looks pretty good. And that's a shoot, guys. That's a straight shoot. Anyway, basically, Sherri, they went over her career, how she wanted to get into the business, but she was too young and everything. They interviewed her first husband, her first husband and everything, and they interviewed her son, who's basically battling cancer right now, and he's kind of like lost part of his mouth, his tongue or something like that, you know, and he looks a lot different because, you know, if we saw the Hall of Fame induction with Sherri, we saw him in the crowd, yeah, it's a complete, he looks like a completely different person because of the cancer. You could see that. But he can talk. He can talk. He can give you. He has you could have a great conversation with him. You know, and he's doing well. He's doing the best he can. But yeah, basically, like I said, they interviewed him. They interviewed Sherri's ex-husband. They interviewed, like I said, Jake the Snake. They interviewed Jim Cornette, Rockin' Robin, Sherri's best friend. And they even briefly talked to the stepmother, of Jared, the one that basically became the full-time mother because Sherri was, doing her wrestling thing. And apparently, the stepmother and Sherri, Jared's real mother, who's Jared's real mother, became best friends, became like a tag team, as he put it, that helped him out. Anyway, they went over her career, and surprisingly, she wanted to start wrestling at 16, and she even went, and this is how she got in contact with Jake. This is how she got in well, it's not how she got in contact with Jake, but it's kind of like you could see the connection. She got to know Jake because he was a referee before he officially became an in-ring competitor, when it came to Mid-South. So Sherri, basically around that time frame, went to Grizzly Smith, and she let him know she wanted to be a wrestler. She kind of gave him a resume or something. And Grizzly Smith back then is like, hey, I get it, but you need to wait till you're 21. So Sherri, she waited, much to her credit, she waited, and that's how she met her first husband and everything. He was an owner of a restaurant or something, and he was part of a restaurant. I don't know if he had ownership or something, but he met her because she was complaining that there was a roach at her table. And they kind of hit it off right then and there. And she said, well, if you want to grab something to eat or something to drink after, come meet me across the street at my job. And he went across the street to her job, not knowing what he was getting himself into or what job she had, until he walked in and found out that it was a strip club. He didn't say the word strip, but that's what it was. It was a strip club. And yeah, they fell in love. Got married, and, they had a child. They went over that. But they also went over the fact that basically she had to leave him and her child when Jared was only 3 months. And the reason for that is because she was determined to pursue her wrestling career. So she traveled, went to, the places she needed to go to become a wrestler. She got various jobs in other parts of the country, I think in the Northeast mainly. And, she was determined to save up to be a wrestler. So she meets this other guy that, is in the wrestling business. And she basically according to the dramatization, she gives him some money, and tells him, I want to be a wrestler. I'm of age and everything. I want to train. I think she was like 18 or something, according to what they said. So she got trained, and the one way they wanted to prove that she could be tough is this guy that she confronts slaps her in the face, and then her reaction is that all you got? So that was kind of like the first step of her proving, hey, I want to do this. I'm not going to back down. So she got in shape and everything, spent time training, getting herself together, and then she went back to Mid-South, to Grizzly Smith when she was 21, showed him her license, showed her her driver's license, her wrestling license, all the documentation, and Grizzly's question to her was, why do you want to do this? And her obvious answer is because, she wants to prove herself. She wanted to prove that she could be, just as tough as the men. And she had a passion for it. She had a passion. So they showed some old clips and everything of her competing, dramatization and actual footage. They showed footage of her competing and everything, in Mid-South, and then in the AWA, and then eventually venturing to WWF. So they had all that footage. They did. And again, they showed a little bit of footage when they started to show off interviews with Jim Cornette, showed that she was the first client that he had. And long story short, the stories they were telling, the recollections, if you will, I thought were pretty good, especially when it came to her in-ring career. They, again, they talked with Rockin' Robin, and Rockin', and Rockin' Robin told us of a story to where, because one of the main things they went over here is Sherri Martell's drug addiction and everything, alcohol and drug addiction behind the scenes, and how she would basically, because she would be in so much pain, going through what she did as a wrestler and as a manager, that she would take a lot of, drugs to kind of ease the pain, like Samas and all that. And Rockin' Robin recalls one time they were at a state fair, because I guess at the time WWE was okay with going to state fairs at times, to do some shows. And she reminds, and she recalls, she basically tells the story how basically she was looking at Sherri. Sherri was, she was looking straight at Sherri, but Sherri wasn't like totally focused on her, like something was off. And she could tell that, Sherri might have been high on something. So what happened is during the match, Sherri obviously could still wrestle, but she was like not all there. Like she didn't, kind of like fully focused on what needed to be done, because there was one part in the match, according to Robin, to where Sherri kicks her real hard right in the throat, and it causes Robin to have struggle breathing. And, she can't breathe very well until she finally takes one big old breath, and, she's fine. But it was almost like Sherri, from what she's telling, Sherri almost could have killed her there, because she was not totally coherent of what was going on. Now, Sherri apparently did apologize to her backstage, because she didn't really want to hurt her and everything in that, in that manner. Then they did go over the fact that when she went, that after Vince McMahon phased out the women's division in the late 80s, early 90s, that's when Vince decided Sherri's best, opportunity to, really shine was to be a manager, to be a valet. And they went over her career. They show footage of her with Savage, with Randy Savage, with Ted DiBiase, with Shawn Michaels. They even show brief footage of her being a babyface with Tatanka and all that. They showed her in her brawls with Luna Vachon and everything. So they went over a lot of that. But because, she was in these scenarios to where even as a manager, she would, get physically, bounced around, she would have to take these Samas and pain pills and whatever they were that she took. So what happened there is in 93, basically a lot of her drug tests, because one thing about WWE at that time, they were just coming off the steroid trial, right? So they wanted to make themselves look good. They wanted to make themselves look clean and presentable. So they started doing a lot of major drug testing. And apparently Sherri had struck out. Previous 2 times they came back positive. It's like, okay, you got one more shot to prove it won't. And unfortunately that didn't happen. And because of that, they had to fire her. I mean, they even have archival footage, I think, from an RF video shoot she did back in, 2002, I believe? And she basically explained that they brought her up to the offices in Stamford, Connecticut, and Vince and J.J. Dillon and, Bruce Pritchard were there, and unfortunately they had to let her go because her drug testing came back positive. Her drug testing came back positive, and, they couldn't have that, they couldn't have that associated with them after what they had just gone through. So Sherri ended up, being fired. And what's ironic is she was in the middle of a program. And this, when they talked about this, when they had Sherri's archival RF video shoot of her talking about this was where all the dots, in case you don't know, connect a little bit, because at the time Sherri was in a feud with Luna Vachon, on WWF. On WWF television, she was in a feud with her, and then all of a sudden it just like disappeared. And the reason being is because they had to let her go because her drug testing came back positive for a 3rd time. Anyway, Jim Cornette goes over the fact that he brought her in later that year as part of Smoky Mountain, They had footage of her promoting, doing like a little promotion of her being excited being at the Parade of Champions. And they showed footage of her basically countering Tammy Cinch, Sunny, if you will, at a Smoky Mountain at the Parade of Champions event. But then Jim Cornette basically talked about how afterwards Sherri came back to the backstage, and she felt like she was, she looked like she was out of it, like she was not all there. And Jim's like, asking her if she's okay. She said, "Oh, I'm fine, and everything." And I guess Jim joked about the fact of her being on a train to Summersville or whatever. But yeah, they talked about that. The one thing they didn't talk about is she had a very brief run in between Smoky Mountain and WWF. She had a very brief run in between all of that and her debut in WCW. She had a brief run, very brief, in ECW. And that's when it was still Eastern Championship Wrestling, going to be Extreme, but she had a very brief run there. But yeah, they also went over her time in WCW, how she debuted and everything. They showed her being associated with Harlem Heat, Booker T, and Stevie Ray. But also behind the scenes, it was just basically like, she was still battling her addiction. Now, they did interview Eric Bischoff, who basically said he brought her in and everything, but also said that, they had to let her go because of the same reasons. Her addiction and everything was getting to her, behind the scenes. Her drug addiction and all that was getting to her. And unfortunately, they had to let her go. Now, what they did not go over, is she did make a brief return for like 1 or 2 weeks in WCW around 99, 2000. She made a brief return there to battle Medusa, and they did interview Medusa as well, because Medusa had battles with her in the AWA. But yeah, they interviewed her as well, and Medusa, I thought, brought a lot of great knowledge to what was going on. Basically talking about the reason Sherri abandoned in her mind. I wouldn't say abandoned, but kind of wanted to pursue her career over being a mother, is because in the business at that time, being a mother was frowned upon. And to me, when I heard that, I'm thinking, well, thank God times have changed, thank God times have changed. But anyway, yeah, they talked to Medusa. She gave insight as to, her acknowledgement of Sherri, and some of the times she would encounter Sherri being like a little out of it at times and stuff like that. But yeah, again, going back to what I said, they talked about Sherri's run in WCW and how that came to an end because of course, her drug situation. The thing they didn't talk about, though, which I guess they were glad to omit, was her appearance in Heroes of Wrestling. Now, in between that time, as I was mentioning, as well, she also made a brief return in the, I think, 2000s to WCW to feud, in 2000, I should say, to feud with Medusa. So she made a brief return then, but she was also, like I said, she made appearances independently, like with Heroes of Wrestling and such, after, during that and afterwards and everything. But then afterwards, she just, stopped wrestling. She was no longer, participating in the business, except for a few appearances here and there. Like, for example, they did show her getting inducted into the Hall of Fame. And again, I mentioned that she had a family there and everything. They showed parts of her Hall of Fame speech. And again, you could see the difference of what her son looked like then compared to what he looks like now because of the cancer. But they didn't go over the fact that she came back briefly to be part of the Kurt Angle-Shawn Michaels feud. They didn't show that footage. So they did, like I said, omit a few things here and there that I think if they had a little bit more time, they could have gone over. They could have gone over and everything. But anyway, I thought they did a decent job on Sherri here. They did talk about the day that she had passed and everything, that she was in visiting her mom. She was visiting her mom. They did talk about a guy she did marry as well, that Jared Fields was trying to separate her from her family and everything. And it was like, you hear what he says about the guy, and it's like, to him, this guy was not good news. Like, this guy may have not been, like Sherri, addicted to anything, but basically he felt that this guy that she had married didn't want Sherri anywhere near him or the rest of her initial family and stuff. Anyway, getting back to what I was saying, they did talk about the day she passed and how she was visiting her mom. They were sitting on the porch and everything. And later that day, she just, I guess, slumped over. They said they had just gotten a puppy and everything. According to dramatization, she was holding the puppy. I don't think she collapsed with the puppy in her hands, which, we would have heard that. So I think that was just done for dramatic effect. But they did say that, Sherri had talked to her best friend and everything, and even her son and all that the day before. And she seemed to be in good spirits. But then all of a sudden, the next day, they get the call that she had passed away. She had slumped, collapsed on the porch, and she had passed away. And it was due to a drug overdose. And when they read this, they read the information of like what was in her system. It's like, I think Medusa said it best, like, she knew, Sherri could take it to an extreme, but she didn't know it kind of like what extent of an extreme from a drug situation she could have taken it until she saw, I guess, what was discovered in her body. They did talk about the funeral and how wrestlers and family was there to pay tribute. They talked about Jake and his situation and, how he at that time was still battling his demons and how according to Medusa, he was not all there himself, but he did give a speech. Jake said he did give a speech. And he just looked over according to what he said, he's looking at the casket and being like, how can you leave me behind? Because again, he's battling with his own situation at that time. And him and Sherri, at the start were an on and off again item in the business and out of the business and stuff like that. But yeah, they went over that, and everything. They talked about that. And it was just, again, you want Dark Side of the Ring, excuse me, sorry about that. But like I said, you want Dark Side of the Ring to live up to its name. Well, this episode and the previous two definitely made it, do that. Definitely made it do that. But what's interesting, though, is her best friend and even those that they talked to, Jake and a few others and Rockin' and all that, they all kind of, agreed that Sherri was, and even her own son doesn't blame her, Like he was angry at the fact that he didn't get to see her as much, but he doesn't blame her for wanting to pursue her career, her career to give him the best life, or at least give herself the best life, and by extension, him and her family the best life she can imagine. So he doesn't blame her. He's just angry he didn't get to spend as much time, talking with her and all that growing up. But anyway, like I said, they went over her funeral and everything, and how Jake wasn't all there mentally and everything. He wasn't all there mentally, but because of his addictions. But he did give a speech, looking at the casket, going like, "How can you leave me behind?" and everything. And again, this was at a time he was still dealing with his demons, and. Yeah, that was pretty much the episode. They did leave it off on a high note, talking about how great she was in the ring. And they did show, her talking. The last footage they showed while they were running credits was her interview and everything, basically ending on a positive note of how she would want people to remember her. So overall, I thought it was good, and just like with Adams and Cope, those episodes before hers, You know, if you want Dark Side of the Ring to live up to its name, this episode, along with those two, does exactly that. Now, I will say this: when they were doing the reenactments, I don't know if Salamonster will point this out, but when they were doing the reenactments, one of the things they like to do is show, people watching wrestling on TV when they're young. So they were showing this reenactment of Jared watching wrestling while he was with his dad. His dad wasn't, who is Sherri's ex-husband, wasn't too much of a fan. But because, Sherri was a wrestler and she'd be on TV, he wanted, they let Jared watch it. And they showed this dramatization of Jared as a kid watching, his mom on television. And I think what the people at Dark Side of the Ring need to do in the future is edit out anything that will basically give away the fact that, that's not real archival footage, so that, and everything. Because I think when they did this episode, they forgot to omit the 24/7 logo icon in the upper right-hand corner of the TV screen when they were doing that dramatization there. But outside of that, thought it was good. And there's no doubt Sherri Martel was a great asset to the business, no matter how you feel about her. I was a fan of hers. She was the kind of individual that you could love to hate and hate to love. And, she could play both lines, if you will, both sides of the pool, if you will, very well. She could be a hateable heel, and she could be a likable, lovable babyface. And she proved that. She definitely proved that. But yeah, I thought it was good. I thought the Adams one was good. And I look forward to the rest of the season. Next week, they're doing Enter Sandman. They're doing Sandman's episode. And then the following week, they're doing Black Saturday. And I think they got a few others after that I have to check. But that's really all my thoughts are on the previous two episodes of Dark Side of the Ring, on Gentleman Chris Adams, and then last night on Sensational Sherri. Let me know what your thoughts are, guys. Comment down below. Live chat if you're watching on YouTube. And until then, I am out.